Welcome to Spaces, Built by Bush Construction, a podcast that brings genuine conversations that opens minds to creative ideas in construction, design, and development. We'll share in-depth stories as an experienced commercial contractor and design firm, as well as our candid interviews with business leaders as it relates to the construction industry. So let's get started. AJ Loss, Michael Johnson, Allie Bolin and I, our Spaces Built by Bush Construction podcast team, are continuing in our series of explaining the different delivery methods or paths that an owner can select before deciding to proceed on a construction project. Which path the owner selects, whether hard bid, construction manager as constructor, construction manager as agent, or design build, will determine the amount of support and input an owner will receive from a contractor during their project. In our last episode, AJ talked about the pros and cons of the traditional hard bid or design bid build delivery method. The hard bid path is best suited to a simple, new construction, open green space project, since the contractor does not enter the scene until the architect has completed design of the new building. Today, we will learn more about the construction manager as constructor, or CMC delivery method, and the ways an owner can tap into the contractor's past knowledge and expertise through each step of their new project. So today we're going to drill down on construction manager as constructor, or CMC. Can you really quickly, we just finished the hard bid drill down, can you let us know again really quickly how hard bid compares to CMC? And then our next episode, we're going to touch on construction manager as agent, or CMA, what those nuances look like between the two, AJ.
Sure. So as we just discussed in the last podcast, the hard bid is where the plans are fully designed and then the contractor is selected. As we talked about last time, the disbenefit is that you don't have the perspective of the contractor during the design process, which is the reason you might select the CMC delivery method. So the one that's coming up next time is the CM agent. So keep in mind there's two construction manager delivery methods. One is CM agent, which we'll talk about next time. One is CM as constructor, or CM at risk, which we'll talk about this time. Real quickly, the CM agent delivery method, the only difference is that the owner holds the risk on construction cost overages, or if a trade contractor would go bankrupt, or many other risks associated with construction. The owner holds those risks on the CMA delivery method. With the CMC delivery method, the contractor holds all those risks. Now, the services the contractor delivers are the exact same in CMA and CMC. The only difference is that the owner holds many of the risks in CMA versus CMC, where the contractor holds those risks. So that's the biggest difference between those two.
That was very helpful, because I think that we do get, it's hard, especially from the two CM roles, the CMA and the CMC, trying to figure out what that exact difference is. So thank you for that. So let's just go ahead and target that construction manager as constructor. What are the pros and cons?
Sure. Okay. So some of the biggest pros are that the owner is able to select their contractor. In the hard bid delivery method, you typically have the plans that are finished. You send the plans out. You take the lowest bid. In many public settings, you can't select your contractor. You take the lowest bidder. So CMC delivery method, you get to select your contractor. Say, I've worked with contractor X before. They did a great job. I want to work with them again. This is the delivery method where you can do that. So people often ask, how do I go about picking my construction manager? You say I can pick them up front without doing a competitive bid process. Quite often, the owner says, hey, we'd like to know what your fee is for the project. The construction manager says, my fee is X% of the cost of the work. Everything else can be and typically is delivered in what's called an open book accounting process. So as we work through the design's finished, we get quotes in from the electrician, and we get 3 quotes from the electricians, and we say, okay, here are the costs. The owner gets to see every one of those costs, and they can help even be involved in the selection process. Maybe the owner doesn't want to hire the lowest contractor in that case, but it's the construction manager's job to bring all those costs from the electrician, the plumber, the masonry contractor, bring all those in, present them to the owner so we can collaboratively pick who our best team for this project might be. So again, it's really an opportunity for the owner to have an open book accounting for the entire project and then for the construction manager to have an open book accounting for that fee percentage. Okay? So one more benefit of CMC, it allows for fast tracking. Now we covered this before briefly, but fast tracking is where the design hasn't been fully completed, but we can start the project anyway. So let's say we haven't identified exactly what type of windows we want for our building. That's okay. As long as the foundations have been designed, we can start on the foundations and the window design can come in later. So you really can't do that in the hard bid delivery method when the entire plan has to be finished before you start building, before you select your contractor. In the case of construction manager, you can fast track it, which actually has the ability to shorten the overall schedule. Another benefit is that during the course of the design process, the contractor provides all that construction perspective. So they give you cost opinions, which again, contractors are really knowledgeable. They can use the cost history database to determine what projects are going to cost in today's environment. They also provide schedule feedback. So when it's trying to figure out how long it's going to take, is it 8 months, 10 or 12 months? The contractor probably has the best perspective on that. Also, contractors provide what's called constructability reviews. So as the design is progressing, the contractor takes a look at the plans and says, hey, are these constructible? In many cases they are, but in sort of unique cases, for instance, what if there's an MRI piece of equipment going into a basement and all we have is a 7-foot tall by 3-foot wide door? Well, we've got to somehow figure an opening in the structure or an opening in the wall, and maybe we need to leave out that entire face of the building to get the MRI machine in the room and then closing the structure. So is the structural design been designed to leave that face of the building out because you can't get the piece of equipment in afterwards? So those are some of the constructability review things that the construction manager can do. And also just the coordination of the different trades. Again, if you can have the sort of contractor's perspective during the design process to coordinate all the parts and pieces going together, things fit better in the field. So those are really the big pros of the construction manager as constructor or construction manager at risk delivery method. The one drawback of this is that the contractor is hired before the design is complete. So it's unnerving sometimes for an owner to say, I'm going to pick my contractor and I don't have a guarantee or a firm understanding of what my total project cost is going to be. Now, construction managers will render budget opinions, but until the entire project has been bid to all the trade contractors and material vendors, you don't really know the exact cost of your project. If the construction manager is doing a good job, you will achieve those budget numbers. But again, it's sort of unnerving sometimes for an owner to say, I'm picking my contractor. We're getting sort of married contractually on this project without really having a firm, guaranteed amount for the total project cost. Now, there is one delivery method that does offer that. It's the design build delivery method. We'll talk about that later. But again, as the design progresses, the owner will have opinions on things that change. So having a contractor say, I guarantee the project will be X, with all those unknown design decisions or unknown owner preferences, it's really, really hard. So the one thing I'd really encourage is for an owner who wants to hire a construction manager to not do it on a partially complete set of drawings. So we've seen this many, many times before where an owner comes to us and says, hey, I've got 50% set of drawings, they're 50% complete. We'd like to pick our contractor. We say, oh, please don't do it based on an incomplete set of documents, because here's what can happen. The owner sends it to 3 different contractors. The contractors give feedback on what the cost is, but it's the contractor who interprets the drawings with the absolute minimum requirements is likely the one who's going to get selected. And that may not be what the owner actually wants. So now at the end of the day, there are a lot of change orders because those drawings didn't identify exactly what the owner wanted. The contractor was able to determine, interpolate what those drawings were instructing the contractor to figure into the pricing. So it isn't the best, most advantageous way. Now, there's a way for a contractor to say, okay, here's your plans, and here's all the things I interpret. It's called a scope of work that we can read between the lines. But even in doing that, it may not be what the owner wants, unless there's a collaborative process back and forth where the contractor says, I believe you meant X by the drawings, and that's not what the owner wanted. That's really that's the heart and soul of the CM delivery method. The scope of work is identified back and forth during the design process. So while it can be done, it is really, really complex to hire a construction manager without having, just based on total project cost, without having a complete set of documents.
Yeah, I think the important clarification there is total project cost, because obviously you can do the same kind of fee percentage thing, and that's still apples to apples, so to speak. But the scope, I think you have an interesting tie back to the MRI story in that. So an example of that would be, this was a real life scenario. We had a very expensive piece of equipment that had to go in, effectively a basement. We had to figure out how to go in there. Working through that, we laser scanned the structure. We worked with the MR, or the machine provider, to say, how many pieces can this thing go into? How do we actually get it in the building? We worked it down to the biggest piece that's got to come through this window. So we had to pull a window out to get it in there. It wasn't going to go normal route. If you didn't have all that in the drawings, as a contractor, we're going to say, well, this thing goes down the elevator. That's what we're going to assume, and it's going to cost X to put it down the elevator when it actually costs 5 times X to pull out the window, to get the equipment, to get the thing in there, to protect everything and get what is, $1 million piece of equipment down into a room. So basically the halfway drawing's bad term, but allows is the opportunity to exploit holes, kind of things that you may not, either you don't understand, or you say there's pretty minimal stuff here, I'm going to assume it's the minimal amount of work and put the minimum cost in there.
Yeah, that's a great clarification, Michael. So in the case where the contractor is hired in the hard bid environment, they've got to figure out how to get that piece of equipment down the elevator, or if it's got to come into a window. However, the owner quite often buys that equipment on their own, but they don't have the voice maybe of the contractor to say, hey, how are you going to get this inside the building? If the owner buys it, shows up in the parking lot, they say, okay, how are we going to get it in the building? Boy, to have the contractor be involved in that discussion upfront would have been beneficial.
I also appreciated the comments that you just had when you were explaining it, because it does show that there is value in having that construction manager as your consultant, having your back, looking forward for you on areas that you don't even know, especially if you've never built before. I think my fear would be mostly that unknown of what's going to happen on my project versus any fear that I might have on not knowing that final price. Because as we heard on the last podcast with hard bid, at the end of the day, you don't really even know exactly with change orders what the final cost is going to be.
You raise a really good point. So only in the case of what we mentioned at fast tracking, where you start the project before the design is fully complete, only in that case is the owner committing to the total project before they know the cost. However, in the construction manager delivery method, unless you're doing fast tracking, you can know the total cost before you start construction. What you don't know is the total cost when you pick your contractor. But that's the benefit of having the contractor there, is to make sure the costs are accurate, they're competitive, and the design is complete and constructible. So you raise a great point. For the owner that's saying, I'm uneasy starting my project before knowing the total cost, that does not need to happen. We can absolutely wait until the design is complete, every cost is known, and then the project starts. You can do that under the CMC delivery method.
So you would only fast track if your schedule was your number one priority. I need my staff to be moved into this building by X date, no questions asked. Otherwise, you wouldn't have to worry about that.
Right, that's exactly right. Now, let's say there's a scenario where the owner says, I've got a budget of $1 million. And, oh no, I came in at $1.4 million. The only cost they have incurred is the design cost and the construction manager sort of consulting cost in the pre-construction phase. They've not paid a dime for concrete, foundations, for steel. They can put the halt on and say, you know what, this project will not work at $1.4 million. They can go back and redesign it. But again, that's the ability for the owner to say, stop, I don't want to proceed. So to the owner that's uneasy about this, they do have an ability to put the brakes on if it does not come in within budget.
And I guess, and again, from that, if I were an owner, I would feel more in control with a construction manager as constructor on my team initially, just because of that same thing. I'm getting guidance from someone down the line. And then if it doesn't turn out, let's have this conversation and either redesign or put the halt on it, versus some other scenarios that could maybe peg me down and I have to move forward as is.
So AJ, looping back around to the scope of work. So I was recently privy to a conversation internally with a project manager about a project that we were bidding on, and it turns out we were high, so we didn't win it. However, the project manager was trying to coach the owner on the incomplete set of documents, i.e. scope we were given. And we had factored in many more technicalities, or we even added some design in to show them how we factor in the renovation to the existing building. And, that coaching process of, if you really want a apples to apples comparison for price, and it was an industry that we've done many projects in before, how does that conversation work? We lost it, but we were trying to educate the owner on, here's the questions you should be asking.
Allie, I know the example you're talking about, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is a prime example of a situation where the owner has let's call it a 50% complete set of design documents, and they say, we want to pick one contractor. We bid against 3 other contractors, and this one was in the automobile dealership industry, okay? And we have done a number of dealerships before. The contractor that was selected had not done any dealerships. So in our response, we gave them a price, and we say, here's our scope of services that included all the things that we knew the owner would need, but that were not identified on the drawings. They selected the contractor who had not done dealerships before, who literally didn't know what they didn't know regarding the scope of work required for an automobile dealership. That contractor was hired. At the end of the day, they had to provide all of those things that the owner wanted, but they provided them at an additional cost because their scope of work, their price for the building did not include those things. At the end of the day, I'm not sure if the owner paid more than what our price would have been. I'd guess they may have. But again, it's the value of the construction manager. That is a prime example of the benefit they can provide in the pre-construction process by asking all those questions and making sure the questions are answered before the design is finished.
Do you have real world examples, or is there a particular project type or owner that best fits this delivery method?
Sure, I would say this delivery method really can be used by any owner. Now there's the unique case where in 3 states in the country, CMC is not allowed as a delivery method for publicly delivered public works projects. So schools, public schools or a police station. So this delivery can't be used. But beyond that, this delivery method could literally be used by every single owner. In fact, if I was going to identify one delivery method that's sort of the silver bullet that can be used for almost every single one of them, it's CMC. This is a really versatile delivery method. So to answer your question, what type of owner? Just about any type of owner could use this one. What type of projects might this be best suited for? Again, we mentioned in the hard bid podcast last time. If it's a simple project, a smaller project, or a project that's built on a brand new site, a new building, without any unforeseen conditions in the existing structure, that's good for hard bid. But anything else, if there's got any level of complexity, if there's a schedule demand that might encourage a fast tracking approach, if there is an occupied facility. So you mentioned what are some projects that we've done that have used the CMC before. I'll mention a few of them. Occupied facility is a great indicator of having a CMC delivery method because the contractor is involved during the entire pre-construction process to help coordinate how the traffic flow in and out of that building that's under construction will be managed. So let's just talk about a few other projects. So we recently finished a project for a private higher education client. And it was a renovation of part of their building. It was an addition onto that building. And we actually started the foundations before all the design had been finished. And there were students still using that building. So prime example of a project that's complex. There's existing conditions in the existing building. And once you take the drywall off and you look behind the walls, there are things that just appear there. And to have a contractor there as a consultant when that happens to help you address what the best approach might be, that's comforting for owners knowing that they've got that expertise. So that's a great example. Another one, we finished a project for a public school entity where it was the same thing. There was a renovation, addition, occupied facility. Students in this K-12 school came in, used the school all day long. We had to make sure we were quiet when we were adjacent to certain rooms with the equipment we were using. So that's a really collaborative way for the owner and the contractor to work together to make sure we're not disrupting the students and also providing a safe environment, safe access, safe travel around the building. And finally, we did a project for a church, and while that's not an occupied facility 100% of the time during the week, on Sunday mornings, we had to make sure that that facility was ready. So there was a little bit of additional traffic control set up on Saturdays. There was some additional cleaning that was done to make sure the church was ready on Sunday mornings. So again, that's sort of a quasi-occupied facility, but on Sunday mornings they had to be ready to go during the entire course of the project, where we were working inside the space and doing a building addition next door.
I think all of this was very helpful. I feel a lot more clarification on my end of what this looks like and what types of owners would best be suited for the construction manager as constructor. Any other questions?
So as the architect in the room, AJ, how do architects and design teams generally see CMC as a delivery method?
Good question, Michael. There are benefits and there are reasons why they might not like this delivery method. To be honest, this delivery method takes a lot of the responsibility off the shoulders of the engineers and architects to make sure they're accommodating schedule, constructability, and budget issues. When the architect says, okay, I'll work collaboratively with you to hit this budget, the entire responsibility of hitting the budget is not on my shoulders. It's on the team altogether. So I think architects really appreciate the fact that there's a contractor in the room who has the detailed knowledge of what those costs might be. There's a contractor in the room who understands the schedule and how things are going to go together in the right sequence. They appreciate that. But again, at the same time, the architects and engineers say, so now we've got a three-way collaboration. And here's where it's sort of, they don't love it, because when the owner says, I've got $1 million budget, and the architect says, you know what, we'd really like to incorporate this element into the project. They've got a third voice in the room of the contractor saying, okay, you know what, Mr. Owner, you may want to choose function over form. And that's when the architects say, the form should lead the function. Quite often what happens is the owner and the contractor sort of align and say, hey, we need function over form. And then the architects are sort of left out in the cold regarding their desire to make sure the building has the form and it accommodates the occupants of the building afterwards. Now again, the contractor and the owner don't necessarily have the same perspective as the architect. The architect's thinking, are the people in the space going to enjoy the view of the outside with these certain windows? Are they going to feel the flow of the building properly? An owner doesn't think about that necessarily, and a contractor doesn't. The architect does, but again, when you've got three of them in the room, the owner and the contractor may decide to choose function, and then form is missed.
Yeah, so you're getting the advantages of both, and I, on the architect side, might say that you, as the conservative contractor, are handcuffing me a little early in the process when we may not know that the price is over, but we're kind of preparing ourselves. In general, a good team kind of heads that off. We always talk about healthy tension within our office of our construction or design team. Like, we want to have a tension to where we're pushing the design a little bit and we're pushing the limits of how we get within budget, but we're kind of keeping each other restrained. So not an unhealthy tension, a healthy, we're going to argue a little bit about how this is going to work, and we're going to get to kind of the right solution. Who's argued healthy argument to get to the right solution.
That's a great point. And at the end of the day, when there's that healthy tension between the architect engineer and the contractor, the owner's the beneficiary, because they will end up with the happy medium. It's not going to be 100% form driven. It's not going to be 100% function driven, but you'll have the right happy medium. And without the contractor in the room to have that healthy debate with the architect and engineer, sometimes that doesn't happen.
Thank you, AJ. I think that really cleared up a lot of our questions. I hope it really helped our owners out as well. Next time, stay tuned. We're also going to be talking about the construction manager as agent that AJ briefly mentioned on earlier. So deep diving into CMA.